This is day 6 of the April 92 7-day retreat at Springwater. I will read a few of the questions that were left over, and then a few that I've added, and see what comes of it. Is it possible to live in this world, not in seclusion or in a hermitage, but in this world, in our daily life, out of silence? Not being constantly entangled in thought. I would like to live that way, out of silence. And yet I can feel that there is a deep resistance of fear. What is relationship? Are we only related to each other through the ideas and images we have of each other? Or is there, or can there be another kind of relationship? I can see that the use of words and analogies like of the computer can keep me right up in the head thinking about things, about myself. But when you talk, I also feel that you're speaking directly to the heart, and that touches me deeply. You talk a lot about the truth of no separation, that all of us together with everything that lives, with everything that is one. I find this idea so inspirational, but inspiration, although connected with lots of energy, isn't the direct seeing, the direct realization of this truth. How can I have direct insight into the truth of this oneness? Why is it so difficult to say to somebody at home what I'm doing here? Is it really, truly possible to live, at least at times, vulnerably open, without defensiveness? Can somehow in our looking together this morning, can these questions come together? The question about whether it is possible in daily life, at least for moments at a time, to live out of a deep silence? Or do I need to go into seclusion, into a monastery? I want to live this way, out of a deep silence, and yet I feel a fear, a resistance, a fear. And very similarly, can one live? Is it really possible to live vulnerably open, at least for moments at a time, without protection, without defending myself, without armor? Can we relate to each other in a new way? Not just based on past experiences and images. Is there another kind of relationship? Which may indeed come out of the silence of no image, just being here vulnerably without defenses. Also in talking right now, and in the course of this talk, next retreat, there are words being used all the time which the brain has learned to listen to, maybe in a very superficial way, knowing the meaning of the words and thinking, being stimulated by words to think about what is being said. That is the difficulty in all talks of this kind, that the communication remains on the verbal level and therefore remains in the head. The way one person expressed it is, in spite of that happening, the head being stimulated a lot, thinking, computer model and so forth, there was another communication happening that was deeply touching. I felt also spoken to the way he put it, as to the heart. I felt you talking to the heart, or coming from the heart. Where am I coming from? Am I coming from the heart, my head? In Zen, you used to say, come from your hara here, this area. In talking right now, isn't one coming from the totality of one's whole being? All of it? The heart, the head, all the energy centers. Somebody brought it up. Why don't you talk sometime about the chakras, energy centers? It's all involved. All of oneself. And can we listen/talk with each other, all of ourselves? Open, engaged. The thinking mind not deadened, because at times one has to think something through. The heart not protected, but open and vulnerable and hurting at times. When one sees about oneself what one has never wanted to acknowledge, has denied because the image says you're this way, you're not envious, you're not jealous, you're a peaceful person, not violent. And then suddenly coming upon violence in oneself, violent thoughts. The heart may ache, maybe more than the heart, the whole body aching with seeing the truth about oneself, which is not the glorious image one had, or we also have other images, not just glorious ones. So, in talking, listening this morning, can all of us be engaged? One's whole being, not just the head, even though the words are instantly picked up, or may instantly picked up by this interpretive center in the brain that associates it with what the meaning is, what it reminds me of, and also the instant desire or urge to figure out. If a problem is mentioned, the brain going to work to try to figure it out. We talked about that in one talk at length. See all that happening and not get totally entangled in it, but also listen in a deeper way, because the speaking also has a deeper way than the verbal part. We could just sit here for an hour, which we do anyways most of the day, and not talk. Commune with each other non-verbally. But there's also a significance and a meaning in talking, in expressing things as clearly as possible, so that the intellect too can understand what is going on, maybe change its mind about what is going on. There's an insight into the wholeness of everything, the non-separation of everything. That is also for the intellect to understand and maybe let go of another notion that we are all separate atoms going on our own course, colliding with each other, and that it has to be this way, that it is the right way. So to not put down or exclude or control the intellect, let it pick up and understand, and yet not dominate, also open to something deeper, which comes with a talk such as this. I think I mentioned it once before, that in speaking, taking a question that has been raised in a meeting or in a group, really letting it permeate the whole being, looking at the meaning of it, the implications of it, and letting words come to express. That's sort of an accessory, the words that come to express what is being looked at and felt deeply. If we connect on that deeper level, it doesn't matter so much what words are being used, because words are limited. Can never express the whole thing. It's impossible for words to express the whole. The whole eludes verbal expression. And yet we do try to put into words what we observe in ourselves. We talked about that yesterday, all the different parts, often so in contradiction and conflict with each other, wanting and not wanting, wanting and at the same time fearing of losing what one wants. To look at that, and that can be expressed in words, and we can meet over these words, see whether we share the same meaning, because if we don't, then we cannot communicate verbally very well. So the question, can I have an insight? I want to have an insight into oneness, into the whole. I understand it now intellectually, and it is a very inspiring understanding. I feel it gives me energy to think in that way, that we're not separate. That all and everything is interconnected. Would you like some water? Yeah. But the person says, I want more than the inspiration of intellectual understanding. How can I have an insight into the whole? I want to see it directly. Is there, in this question, in this longing, is there involved an idea of the whole, whatever it may be, some vague sort of an object, a thing, which I can see? This is how we think. We cannot think any differently. If there's insight into the whole, there must be somebody who has this insight, and I want to be that one. I don't mind sharing it with others, that others have that insight too. I don't mean it. I want to be the only one. But I want to see into the whole. And with that, there is a conceptual framework here, isn't there? Something to be seen into by me. Can we see that intellectual, conceptual framework operating? When there's this yearning to see the whole, the yearning to see God, to see the truth, to see oneness. The whole conceptual framework needs to go, because it isn't like that. There is only seeing, which is not divided, which does not have this whole ball of self with all its memories and images, past, future, which does not have this ball of self at the center. When that's at the center, then the seeing is not whole. Then it is in terms of my needs, my past, my compulsions, my fears, my yearnings, my goodwill, whatever all there is collected over the years, over the centuries, because we've taken up what our parents and their parents have collected, what all of society and civilization has collected as meanness. That usually sits at the center of perception. And therefore the perception is not clear. It is divided, fragmented. So, is the very first step in this work that is so difficult to describe to our friends at home, is the first step to see the bondage to the past, the conditioning of the past, the programs, the myths, the legends, the beliefs and faiths, the wants and fears that come up this moment, palpably visible, audible, feelable, to see that at the middle of wanting and looking outwardly or inwardly. To see without judgment the bondage to the past. Let's put it simply. I know it's not the whole thing. It could be put differently, but we want to have simplicity in our expression. It is possible for any one of us at moments of clarity to see our bondage to the past, to what was maybe just a moment ago, and it's already on the program to see now through that. That's why program is a good analogy, because it's so instantaneous. Whatever I think now is somewhere recorded in this brain. And as long as that is functioning in looking and listening, it will interfere with a pure, clear perception now. The pure, undivided perception, being the whole. It's not separate from birds and stars and people and books or streets. So you could say, wait a minute, there's something very paradoxical about this. My perception is not pure because it is bonded to the past. How can I see that? When the perception is already prejudiced by the past. How can I see prejudice with prejudice? This is how the intellect gets entangled and may cause resistance to looking by saying it's impossible, it doesn't make sense. But not to fall for these snares, these intellectual conundrums. Because with nobody's explanation for how it happens, why and what causes it, there can be insight this instant. And has happened to many human beings since time immemorial, recorded and probably much more unrecorded. A glimpse or a period of time, it doesn't have to be a glimpse. It can have stability. To see what I call right now the bondage to the past, to become aware of it without judgment, without the me saying, no, I don't want to be this way, I should be different. That may come later. But at the moment of insight, it's just clear what this self is all about. And the clarity of insight has no self. It is free of that. It just sees what is true, that the past operates in most of our relationships. I remember what you did or said, or what other people have told me about you, and this is how I see you when you come into the room. And to that I respond. Also from the idea that I have about myself, which has come to me from X sources. What I think of myself, my superiority or my inferiority. I will meet you different if I feel superior to you. I will meet you differently if I feel inferior to you. Do you see how image meets image and there is no direct communication or communion between us with that bondage to the past? Does the question come up, how can I break out of it? Can there be a breaking out of it? Is a less I-centered way of putting it. Can there be a breaking out of this bondage? So that when you come into the room, or you see me sitting in the room, I'm taking that right now, we meet freshly. Memory may be there. The memory's not dead and we haven't taken an injection to anesthetize the memory. But it's seen that this is memory, and what's coming in right now is not a memory. It's somebody walking with eyes open, limbs moving, sitting down, expression in the face, expression in the whole body. And can that be taken in vulnerably? A person may come in and look angry, disconcerted, sad. How will we meet each other when one of us is angry, disconcerted, or sad? Looking as though then the first word that's going to come out of the mouth is one of blame. blaming me or blaming someone else, what we call negativity. How will we meet it? Our usual ways are, I don't want you to be this way, I want you to be different, and protecting myself from your possible attacks, defending, what you're saying is really not true, or not even listening, shutting down. Protecting what in the process? What are we protecting when we shut down to somebody being angry or sad or negative, bristling with resentment? What are we shutting down? What are we protecting in ourselves? One can ask that at the next time this happens, as one notices the protective armor going into place. It can be felt. It can be felt. Both can be felt. The protective armor going into the place, the noticing of it, and the protective armor loosening up again. All of that can be felt. Because if I want to find out how to meet this and how this can go, it has to loosen. I want to find out whether I can meet your bristling resentment or anger or sadness openly and vulnerably by listening without protection, without knowing the outcome to you or me. Laying my old life on the line, so to speak. You may tell me that I have done wrong. May be critical of me, angry at me. How long will I listen vulnerably without making a technique out of it? Because it can be worked into a technique. I once sat in the airplane next to a young man, beautifully, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, white shirt and tie, who was reading a thick journal on how to meet people in the corporate establishment or business without defensiveness, to listen in a friendly way. And there were all kinds of steps outlined. Maybe a good step to take so that one can begin to listen to each other, but I don't want to have new armor. Trade the old for new, if that indeed was armor. It looked like that, of course. I was just sort of peeking over them. And I'm not even saying I shouldn't get angry or hurt. Just not protected in the habitual way, which means shutting down the listening, shutting down the communication. To be interested in what comes up. To be interested whether it's possible to see you as you are, not with image. To see myself as I am, not with image, but the actual live processes revealing themselves as they are this moment. Can we do that? At least at times when we remember this? The first step being to see the image come up, mine, yours. That's the truth. Images are there, and when they come up, that is so. And that is the bondage to a soft communion. Soft meaning no protection. I can't take care of your protection or your armor. That's your business. And that's often how we start out. We want to fix the other person. It's easier. And it gives us a project, and then we can be successful. And we can be somebody, a fixer of others. But right now I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in finding out about myself. How will I meet you? Today, tomorrow. As you approach me or contact me with what seems everything that I already know. I know what it means, I know how you feel, I know what you're going to say. And I don't like it before you've even said it or done it. You know, maybe in someone, one person, A, B, C, having an interest in this open meeting, not an interest in changing the other, but wondering whether one can live vulnerably and unprotected, and putting it to the test, finding out, maybe that has an effect on the person who just came in his or her quote-unquote usual ugly mood. We don't know to what extent our seeing the other through an old image reinforces that in the other, in ourselves. Because we perceive very subtly without often knowing it, being aware of it. And someone looking at me with really open, innocent eyes, not ready to shoot or to react or respond, may loosen something up. Who knows? I'm not going to do it in order to loosen you up, but to find out about myself, whether I can live and relate without the bondage of the past, seeing it arise as I meet you. And where does this looking come from? Looking at the bondage of the past, seeing it arise. Doesn't that needs come from a silence of interested wondering? Being in touch with something more spacious than the cocoon of the past. The cocoon of the past can only be seen from something more spacious and silent, silent meaning the silencing of prejudice and opinion. Not through method, but through seeing it, discovering it, becoming aware of it. And with that, sort of like a merging into silence of no opinion, no defense, no outcome predicted or intended, just now. People have told me when I get so involved in my image or your image, I don't hear the birds. I've noticed that. I don't hear the wind. But if there is a becoming aware of the entanglement in the cocoon of the past, then wonder of wonders, there may be the wind and the birds too, and the silence that permeates not just this room, not just this valley, not just this country, it's this whole universe, partaking and participating in this silence of this moment of looking and listening. The person who asked this question early on said, I want to live out of that silence. Do I have to go into solitude, take a year out to go someplace alone, come here more often? Or is it possible in my daily life, where I work, where I live, I want to live that way, and yet at the same time I feel a fear, I feel a resistance against it. That's seeing something, isn't it? Seeing the resistance. Not just the idea of how I want to live, but the resistance against it, the fear of it. What is this resistance? Because we all know it. One person asked also early on, are we too lazy to be aware? And I wondered at the time, what do we mean by the word laziness? Isn't that also some kind of resistance? Resistance to being open, in touch with what is rather than what should be, willing to face what's there, be with it, no matter what, silently, without choice. What's the resistance? Why is it so resistant? Isn't this whole ball of the past that we've called our bondage, isn't that the resistance? All that I call me, isn't that a resistance? Gotta tread very carefully. I know there's a lot involved in what I call me, my capacities, my education, my goals of what I'm going to be, painting or being an artist, dancing or whatever. Please don't just say, this isn't resistance. We're looking at it in a new way right now. One can paint and dance or study without resistance. But the urge to be what I was or to become what I imagined to be, attachment to the whole idea, this whole ball of ideas about myself, originating in the past and added to in the present, isn't that a resistance to living vulnerably open, with an open heart, silently, not in seclusion in a hermitage, but from moment to moment? The fear is of losing what I, in my mind, hold dear. If I live out of silence, would I still have my friends, my hobbies? My interests? Would I have to renunciate all of this? There's so many ideas about this. And the fear is that these ideas may come true. Is that it? Is that the fear? One person said, I am afraid I would disappear if I lived out of silence, without protection, without defense, listening and looking openly. Yeah, there is something that disappears, but it's good riddance. It's what divides and poisons and scares and causes anguish. And at this moment of looking when all of that is out of the picture. And there is no fear, and then there is no resistance. There's only what is. And this throbbing heart and circulating blood and breathing and sensation of whatever all of this is part of it. That doesn't disappear. And it needs no protection other than the protection that comes automatically without our intention. When a tree comes crashing, we run aside, we step aside, we don't just stand there saying, "Let me see." Without image. The practical mind is very sharp at a moment of emergency, and yet often very unself-centered. People have attested to that time and time again in natural disasters like earthquakes or floods. The sharpness of the practical mind to pull somebody out from under, save somebody's life at the risk of one's own, that isn't being pondered. The situation demands action, and the action flows forth. The energy is there because the mind is clear and uncluttered with ruminations. So, instead of the desire to see the whole, can one see the part clearly? The thoughts, the ideas, whatever's there, anger, image, the bondage, without despair or condemnation. And also without acceptance. Why should it be accepted? By whom? It's just there. But when it's seen, it changes in the light of a wholesome seeing. Things are not what we thought they were before we looked directly. They're different and they change. One person said, yesterday you were talking about looking at something like jealousy or envy or anger. There wasn't any there, but I brought some up in memory, but it just went away when I looked. It didn't stay. So we said, well, let's look at it when it is really there, not just in a silent retreat, but or sometimes in a silent retreat people get very angry over something. Somebody being inconsiderate in the room, taking the last bit of mushroom peas and tofu, or person already has a second helping, I haven't had my first yet. Does one get angry then? And that's the time to look how thinking about it and verbalizing and moralizing about it silently in the mind keeps that anger or upset going. That's something to discover. The more we think and talk about it to ourselves, and then we talk to others, after the retreat, let me tell you what so-and-so did. And with that, the little embers are fueled again with this new oxygen there. To watch that, to be aware. Because then we have the freedom to just stop talking about it. We don't have to keep thinking about it. It's happened, it's over. And the moment this peters out, the thinking or talking about it, the anger also peters out, dissolves. What is really seen and understood, the intellect participates in this. Remembering that every time I keep going and going at this thing keeps going, and then I don't want to feel this way. And I don't look holistically, I only now focus on this this feeling in my stomach, and I say, oh, it didn't come from any thought. Don't say it was thought. It's something very real. I said, it is real. But thought started it. The thought that said he shouldn't have done this. She should have been more considerate of me. Always happens to me. Why always me? Why am I? And so on and on. So, the very last question was, how can I'm at a loss of telling my friends what I'm doing here. Going to hold 7-hour-long talks. How can one talk about it? The question is a person interested in it who asks. It makes a lot of difference on the flow of words that come in the one who's being questioned. I found that to my great surprise, sometimes the words just don't come and it sounds awful what I say. But I also realize the person isn't interested. Whereas if somebody really is interested, then, well, what do you need to do to tell? Remember or look right now what you're doing. The memory may be very weak of what happened, because if one really lives something fully, not so much as recall it. But you can always look now and see what is going on as the person asks this question. And if the person keeps listening, that is a shared energy to look and express in words how it's indeed possible to look at what we're doing, which usually is not knowing what we're doing. That's what we're doing most of the time. Acting unconsciously, with little or no awareness. I'm not saying all the time, and it changes with this work. One doesn't have to do this work to become more aware. I'm not saying that. So if somebody asks, you can start any place. And if you say to the person, I got to take a moment and be quiet and look, because this is part of this work. Let me just, for a moment, look. What is it that we're doing? What is it I'm doing when I'm sitting down? And you take some time out, you may find that the space widens and opens. And if your friend is also listening, that's the same listening space. And then the words will come. We don't take time out and try to just immediately produce it from memory, we're having a hard time. People usually tell me in the afternoon they don't remember what the talk was about. Somebody sometimes says, well, it was a good talk, but don't ask me what you said. And I don't remember it either. So what are we doing right now? Without knowing it, you don't have to tell anybody right now. Can there just be openness, listening, without knowing? Without a purpose in mind? Without a motive? Just, what's happening? It doesn't have to be known. We will end here for today.